Going live. Okay. Great. Okay. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to Zibby's Bookshop. I'm Zibby. It's so nice to have the store full with all of you here today. So many writers, so many people that I've met before, and this fabulous panel. Oh, I didn't meet you yet. Moderated by Sue Shapiro, who, by the way, after I graduated from business school in 2003, this is going back a minute, I took Sue's class because I decided life was too short and I had to write that novel. And I wanted to get more clips under my belt and all that. So I took Sue's class, writing for magazines and newspapers. And she said, with whoever in the class could sell a piece for $1,000, she would take out to dinner. I viewed that as a personal dare. And so I did it. By the end of the class, I had sold an essay to Modern Bride, but she never took me to dinner. And then we lost touch until like 2 years ago, 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago. And she was on my podcast and I said, you never took me to dinner. And she said, no, you were supposed to take me to dinner. So view this as me taking her to dinner now by having her here. Anyway, enjoy. Have fun.
Way better than being taken out to dinner. Can you hear? Does that work? Great. Okay. So thank you guys so much for coming. And especially thanks to Zibby for letting us do a great event at her beautiful bookstore. And thanks to Tessa, who I've been driving nuts for weeks on end. So what I thought I would do is, I know a lot of my former students are here, so you know that I always try to get the most fascinating, brilliant minds together, and we're going to pick everybody's brain and find out all about their success. So I'm going to introduce the panelists, and I'll ask a few questions, and then you guys can ask questions yourself. Okay, so over there we have producer Alan Gasmere. He has a BA from Temple University, a law degree from Southwestern. He was vice president at William Morris and is now a partner at Veritas Entertainment, an independent film and TV production company whose credits include Mosquito Coast, A Spy Among Friends, and my favorite movie last year, Complete Unknown. Next to him is, Alison Sinji, who has a BA from Scripps and an MA from the University of London. Okay. Alan, stand up? Sorry. Okay. Alison Sinji has a BA from Scripps College and an MA from the University of London. She's a popular LA writing professor, international award-winning journalist who has written for People, Vanity Fair, Wall Street Journal, LA Times, and she's author of the memoir, Where the Peacocks Sing. New Jersey native Marcus Harper has a BA from Rutgers and MS in Digital Media Management from USC. He's the deputy features editor of the Los Angeles Times, where he also edits the very popular LA Times LA Affairs column about nightmare dates to happily ever afters in Southern California. Great. Lee Oglesby went to Amherst College and Columbia University, and she is now a senior editor at Flatiron Books. She acquires nonfiction related to science, health, the environment, and culture. In previous roles, she worked at Milkweed Editions and Oxford University Press, and we're doing a panel on memoirs together at AWP 10:30 Saturday if anyone's around. Lee. Okay, next to her is Dan Lopez, who has a BA from the University of Central California. He's the LA editor at Counterpoint Books, where he does literary, commercial, fiction, translation, and books that explore the Latino experience. I was very lucky to work with him on American Shield. He has written himself for LA Review of Books, with New Gay Fiction, Time Out New York, Lambda Literary, and is author of the novel The Show House and the story collection Part the Hauser, Limb the Sea. And next to me is Shannon Luders Manuel, who has a BA from Southern Oregon University and master's from University of Massachusetts. She's an LA editor, writer, sensitivity reader who has written for the New York Times, LA Times, Real Simple, LA Review of Books, and she is author of the debut memoir, The One Who Loves You, a memoir of growing up biracial in a black and white world, which came out in February. Great. And I'm Susan Shapiro, and I went to University of Michigan, NYU. I'm a writing professor, now teaching online, and I'm the New York-based author of many books my family hates. And actually, we're just in time, BJ. So BJ, yes, they're, another chair. So we had.
Oh, I'm moving down again.
Yeah, move one down. Okay, perfect timing. What an entrance. So, no, that's okay. So BJ Robbins went to University of Rochester and the University of Sussex. She worked at Simon & Schuster and Harcourt before opening her LA-based literary agency in 1992, where she represents fiction and nonfiction and has worked with award-winning best-selling authors of memoir, biography, history, pop culture, sports, travel, adventure, medicine, and health. BJ Robbins, can you stand up for the camera? Fantastic. Okay, so welcome everyone. So I'm going to ask a few questions and then we're going to open it up for you guys. Okay, so first question that I'm going to ask is, let's talk about exactly what you're doing, what you're working on. So Shannon, you just finished this debut memoir, and tell us a little bit about it. And there's an interesting debate that I'd love to ask the agents and the editors, which is some people say when you write a memoir that you have to write the entire book, and other people say you could sell it on a proposal. So how did you start? Here, sorry.
Oh, okay. So originally I was going to write the whole manuscript first, but that was taking quite a bit of time, and I had some friends who were selling on proposal. So I decided to switch to that route. I was about 75% done with my first draft. So then I switched, and I was able to find an agent and sell on proposal. It did take 6 months to find a publisher. I might have had better luck had I finished the whole manuscript first, but I don't know how long that would have taken. And I do think there were other issues involved in it taking a long time to find a publisher, being that I am a woman of color and also a mixed race person, and it's hard to find spaces for mixed race authors, which I think that also contributed. So,
And now, since we have editors and agents, Dan, tell me if I have it right. Usually, if you want to write fiction, you have to write the whole book. And I think you said that you wrote 2 books yourself. But if you want to sell nonfiction, some nonfiction can sell on proposal. And then where do you stand with memoir?
Sure. I'm gonna put the book down. Yeah, I think with fiction, you generally want to have the full book. It's just hard to buy fiction on proposal. There's just a lot of it, and people want to see, how the story unfolds and all that. With nonfiction, it depends. I know the book we worked on together, American Shield, was a memoir, and it was sold on proposal based on a viral New York Times opinion piece. However, generally, at least a counterpoint where I work, we generally do not buy memoirs on proposal. That's not a hard and fast rule. There are exceptions, but for the most part, we treat memoir the same way we treat fiction, in the sense that you want to have the whole thing to evaluate. With narrative nonfiction, a history, something like that you would sell on proposal, and the proposal would include a lot of information about you as the author, your subject matter, why you're the right person to do it, and a pretty substantial writing sample as well.
Interesting. And Lee, so with Flatiron Books, and I know we're doing a panel with 3 of your 3 Flatiron memoirists. What do you think about proposal versus the whole manuscript?
Okay, so I think you got it exactly right. I'm a nonfiction editor. I think almost everything I've bought is only on proposal. I don't generally buy on full manuscripts. So the three memoirs the 3 memoirists that I'm speaking with on Saturday have written what I would call memoir plus or hybrid memoirs. So there are elements of memoir in their book. Like it starts with a story that is about their own life, but then they do a lot of research and answer a bigger question and get into it goes from like the I to the we. And that because there were bigger questions, because there was more research involved, because there is a level of journalism to some degree involved in some of those books. That felt more like a narrative nonfiction book for me, and so it made sense to buy those on proposal. But otherwise, I would say, in my perspective, especially from what I've seen with other editors, memoirs are generally bought on the full manuscript rather than proposals.
Cool. Can we get the other mic? Pass it this way. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so BJ, as a literary agent who has sold a lot of nonfiction. How do you feel about memoirs? So if somebody wants you to be their literary agent, will you sell it on a proposal? Do you sometimes need to see the whole book?
As I don't know if Dan or Lee said this, but it really depends on the book. If it's somebody who is unknown, I would want the whole book, because you have to really prove to a publisher that this writer can write a whole book. For someone who is a little more well known, you can then do it with proposal. It really depends. I don't have any hard or fast rules. It's like each project requires its own method of selling it to a publisher.
And do you agree that if it's a debut fiction that you really need the whole manuscript?
Yeah, fiction always, especially debut fiction.
Mm-hmm.
But once if you're established, you can just tell your editor what you want to write next, and they go, okay. But it's a nice place to be. It's not common, unfortunately. But yeah, when you're starting out, you have to finish the novel. I would never take on, although I did once sell a novel based with just 100 pages. That was a long time ago. I don't know if I could get away with that today.
Great. If you don't mind handing the mic to Marcus. So I always say, and a lot of my students are here who've proven this, that I think the best way to launch any kind of writing career, but also especially a book, is to publish a short piece. And everyone is in love with not only the LA Times, but the LA Times LA Affairs. So if somebody wanted to be in the LA Affairs, am I correct in saying that you can't pitch it? You can't say, I want to write about the craziest date I ever had in Santa Monica. You have to just write, about 800 words?
Well, it's really 1,000 words.
1,000 words, okay.
Lately, I've been letting people write longer, which is not great for print when you have a very small space to fit this essay in, but we manage. And actually, I do take.
You will take a pitch?
I will take a pitch
Oh.
if it's a fascinating story, like a compelling date. And sometimes I regret it because they're not always what you talked about or expected. I have one right now about someone who got married in Vegas, and it's much longer than it's like 2,000 words.
Oh.
So I've got to deal with that. So.
Wow. Okay, but you're very open for anybody that has a story and it has to have like a LA connection, right?
Yeah. It's got to have an LA connection. Yeah, if I want to talk about it. Yeah. Oh, it needs to be true. It has to have the actual names, not made up names, etc. Yeah, it's got to be a real story. It's got to grab my attention. So I've told your class before, it's got to really make me laugh at some point, or make me feel really embarrassed actually for the person because they're in this weird situation or this weird date. And I've told your class so yeah, it's got to be about LA or Southern California. I have a great essay about Baltimore, and I wish I could hand it off to some other editor somewhere else because it's a really fascinating tale.
Interesting. Okay, so Allison, now you do, aside from writing the memoir, you do journalism. So are most of the pieces that you're doing, do you write a pitch letter at this stage?
Okay, well, I'll stand up. That's a really good question. I just want to go back to memoir for a moment, because I published my memoir about a little more than 10 years ago. And so I think what I'm hearing people grappling with is the difference between like what on what criteria is a novel or memoir bought. And in many cases, the reason a novel cannot be bought in an outline form is because so much of its value is based on execution. So how is this book crafted? What are the themes that run throughout the book? How is it how did the characters resolve their dilemmas throughout, right? So you can't really figure that out with a short proposal. So that's why most novels, would you agree, are bought only when they're finished. Okay, so right now I'm actually writing mostly, I'm writing a second memoir, and I expect to sell that on proposal. But the difference is I'm going to be writing quite a few chapters and really understand what the story is before I try to sell it. So it's not as though writing a proposal for a memoir is a way to cheat. It's you actually really have to understand the story and your voice. And Okay, so that's one part. In terms of writing, right now I'm writing mostly personal essay. So it just depends. I have a lot of relationships with editors. So they'll, something will come up, like, for example, when the fires happened, the editor of Sierra just shot me an email and said, checking in, how's everything going? And I said, it's really devastating. And I was telling him about what was going on in my life, that 17 of my friends had lost their houses. And that I took my dogs for a walk along the LA River and what that experience was like after the fire. And he said, I just want this piece. So I spent the next 9 days writing it, and let's see what happens. And I guess he loved it. So so it really depends. It just depends on what kind of relationships you have, how far along you are in your career as a writer, and how sure you are of your voice and your story.
Cool. And Alan,
Yeah.
thank you.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, Alan. So
Yeah.
so both when you were at William Morris and now when you're at Veritas,
Yeah.
You work with screenwriters.
For the most part, yeah.
Right. So do the screenwriters, you said they come to you through a literary agent?
Usually they come to me through a literary agent or a manager, or that's how they come to me. Otherwise, I'm inundated every day with query letters from wannabe writers all over the world asking me to read their horror script or some other shit. And I don't really, if I spent my whole day reading all this stuff, I'd never make any money. And I'm not allowed to do that according to my wife. So I get material from people I know, mostly agents, because I was one and I trained a whole bunch of them. And I get a lot of manuscript, of galleys, I should say, of books that are going to be published in the next couple months from book agents, New York, LA. I get it from places like CAA, who are trying to sell something from book to film or book to TV. And so, yeah, that's where I get most of it. Or for a crazy example, I saw an article about Tana French in the New York Times. And I went, who's that? And I found the agent, and we got the rights to the Tana French books, and we sold it as a TV show called Dublin Murders. And that lasted a year until the studio screwed it up. But, so it all depends. I read a lot of book reviews. I read a lot of from London. I read the LA Times. I read the New York Times. I read the Wall Street Journal. I'm reading all just to see if there's an idea, because that's really what you want to sell. I mean, I'm different than a lot of the people here. We can always fix whatever doesn't work. And I use that term "fix" in quotes. But yeah, that's generally what I do right now. I mean, yeah, I ran motion picture literary screenplays, and that I sold for millions and millions of dollars in the olden days when they were buying them for that much money, and they turned into big movies. And I started this company with a show called Vikings that ran for a while, and it's on Netflix right now. So yeah, that's sort of what I do.
Cool. All right. So let's get some advice from everybody on the panel. So Shannon, you work as a sensitivity reader. So could you tell us a little bit about, I've used sensitivity readers myself. Could you tell us a little bit about when you're seeing manuscripts as a sensitivity reader, as an editor, what are the biggest mistakes that you're seeing? Like, just for an example, I remember I had somebody in my class who was a gay male who wanted to write a YA book with a lesbian as the protagonist. And there was a bunch of editors and agents that were on the panel, and they were just like, why? Like, they just said, that's so complicated in itself. Like, isn't there any way that you could rejigger it? So does that come up where somebody's appropriating someone else's story, or they're not the person to tell it?
Yeah. For the most part, stuck. For the most part, by the time it gets to me, it's already with a publisher, and the publisher hires me to look at it. So it's not too egregious. But it'll be something like, oftentimes the writer will be afraid to talk about race. And so it's like more like I give them the okay. So it's kind of like it's kind of like, so in one of my first books that I did a sensitivity read for, it was a white woman who did a young adult novel with a biracial character who was a jazz musician, and she talked about the biracial character's race, but then it was first person, so the character talked about her own race, but she didn't mention any of the other races of any of the characters until like she would like bring it up maybe halfway through or 3/4 of the way through, and it'd be like, wait, what? And so I gave her that feedback, like it's okay to talk about race, it's okay to say, oh, my Jewish friend, my Chinese friend, my boyfriend is Hispanic, and so I got feedback through the publisher that she had actually been afraid to talk about race because she thought, oh, well, this character gets racialized all the time. So I was afraid that for her to she wouldn't want to talk about race. No, like she sees race all the time. We all do. It's okay to talk about it. So that was one of the things that that came up. Another one is hair. It's hard for people to know how to talk about hair. So I help them with that. Yeah.
A discussion about whether Jufro is a sensitivity or not, and I was like, I wouldn't go there, but
yeah,
made me feel a little uncomfortable.
Yeah. And that's something I, of course, would not know how to handle. But, yeah. Yeah. So anyway, so I've gotten good feedback from people. So it's basically just they're often scared, I think, of what's gonna come back. And then they're relieved when I say, like, for the most part, you did a great job, but, and then I say, here's the, like, I give them permission and they're, to fix these certain things. Oh, thank you so much. So, yeah.
Cool. And by the way, if anybody wants some information about hiring Shannon as a sensitivity reader, I also work a lot with ghost editors. So after I complete a manuscript, I will hire like a former Doubleday editor or a literary agent to like kill it for me first before I even send it to my agent. So that's a thing if anybody wants to talk about that. Okay, so Dan, so you're seeing, I think people submitting to Counterpoint directly, or are you only going through literary agents at this point?
Pretty much we only work with literary agents. There are exceptions. Historically, we've published some authors, like Wendell Berry and people like that who, they're just people we're going to represent. And if one of our authors is friends with someone like, hey, you should check out this person. Kind of like what we were talking about earlier with movies. If you're not going to go the literary agent route, you have to have an in. But for the most part, it's going to be through an agent. They're going to know your taste, and they're going to make sure they send you things that stand a good chance of getting acquired. So yeah, I would say we almost exclusively work with literary agents. There are occasionally exceptions, but all of this is really like, if you want to be in this industry, you want to put your best foot forward. So that's the same with like having the full memoir, because you're going to be in a better position than someone who only has the proposal. All other things equal. It's the same with the literary agent. If you have the literary agent, it's going to open doors for you that wouldn't necessarily be available to you otherwise. So it's not that you can't or that we won't. It's that it makes it a lot easier for you if you do have the agent. The agent's also going to handle all the things that you don't want to get into your editorial relationship. Like, you don't want to have to discuss directly with your editor about advances and why am I not getting paid? Why haven't I seen my royalties? Like, all that kind of stuff. That is stuff you want your agent to handle with either your editor or somebody else that you're publishing. You don't want to like that. You don't want that to influence how you work on the actual work itself, the book.
Great. And let me give it to Lee. And Lee, if you don't mind, so at Flatiron, you're probably working mostly with literary agents also?
Yeah.
Okay. And what kind of mistakes are you seeing? I mean, I know that they're being vetted by literary agents, but I know quite a few people who've got agents who send out manuscripts and they don't sell.
Mhm.
So what kind of mistakes are you seeing? And we're going to talk about it at our panel, but it does seem like memoir is a tough sell these days.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, okay, so two different answers. Memoir is kind of a tough sell. It doesn't mean that it doesn't sell, but the standards are pretty high, that you're looking for something that is an extraordinary story and extraordinarily written. And other than that, like having an extra boost to it. So it's a memoir, but it's also about this. Makes it easier for me to pitch it to my publisher and then get approval to make an offer that's substantial. So yeah, I will say that memoir is hard, but it's not impossible. It just has to be like really beautifully written. In terms of the other things, I won't say that I see mistakes in the submissions that come to me, but I do. There's just a very limited number. There's a limited number of books that I can accept a year. So my goal is to acquire 8 to 10 books a year. I probably receive 8 to 10, maybe 12 proposals a week. So the vast majority of what I'm receiving, I'm not saying yes to. There are a lot of good books that I'm not saying yes to, probably because they are a better fit for a different editor or a different publisher, that they might be a little more literary than what I publish usually, or they might be just like they might be too commercial, they might be too prescriptive. It might not be the right fit for me. It might not be the right fit for what my marketing and publicity teams are really good at publishing and promoting. And so I might pass on something because I think, oh, this would be great, but not for me. So I would say that I don't see, I can't think of like big things that come across my desk that strike me as mistakes. They're just not right for me or my publisher.
Cool. BJ, you're getting stuff that everybody's just sending stuff to agents. So what kind of mistakes are you seeing? I mean, one of the things that I see in my sell your first book class is there's a lot of stuff that's half baked. Or by the way, someone will publish in LA Times, LA Affairs, and they'll be like, okay, give me the name of your agents. I'm doing a book. And I'm like, okay, you're not ready to go to agents yet. You've only written 1,000 words. So what kind of stuff are you seeing that could be improved?
I was starting to feel very envious of everybody else talking about like 10 or 12 a week, did you say? I get 10 or 12 or 20 a day.
Wow.
Queries. Of course, mine aren't vetted, so a lot of them can be just dismissed out of hand, but it's just an insane volume of material that comes into my office. Now I can't remember the question.
What kind of mistakes are you
Oh,
seeing?
I see
are they
so many
half-baked?
mistakes.
Yeah.
It's not even a half baked. It's like, I teach this little thing on query letters. I critique people's query letters, and then I tell them what they're doing wrong. And it's really like you have to present yourself and your material in the most professional way you can. And that requires doing homework on who I am and what I represent as an agent, because I get so much inappropriate material. And it's just a waste of everybody's time. There's been a new thing where there's some kind of, I guess people pay a service, and maybe it's run by AI because the query letters are just so awful. And the minute I see that in the header, I'm like, no, I want a writer because they care about their own work enough to want to get it out into the world, that they've taken the time to do the research to find the right agents for them. There are a lot of agents. They pop up all the time. There are a lot of agencies, a lot of independent agents like myself. There are a lot of bigger agencies with a number of people in them. And it's up to the writer to do that research and find the right fit. And so when somebody sends me a letter and they're referencing maybe some writers I've represented or books that I've represented, or they heard me speak, or they've made some kind of a connection, no matter how loose it may be, I'm more willing to pay attention to that writer than to somebody who just says, "Dear agent, I have written a book about a blah, blah, blah," and who knows, maybe that book is fantastic, but I've lost interest. I'm done. I have too much to do. I mean, reading query letters, I used to, up until about 3 weeks ago, not read all of them. I had an assistant who read them, but she left. So I've sort of now they're like piling up at this alarming rate. I think today I looked and I had about like 575 unread emails. It's like, yikes.
So you're hiring a new assistant?
What's that?
Are you hiring a new
I'm
assistant?
not, I want just a reader. I
Okay.
want somebody, a really savvy reader who's going to understand what I'm looking for. I am not taking on a huge number of new clients. I have some clients who are incredibly prolific and publish a lot, take up a lot of my time. So I've gotten to the point in my career where I have to really fall in love with something. I have to really love it and say, oh my God, I can do something with this. I mean, back when I started 30 something years ago, it was like, oh, can I sell this? Yes. Hello, let's go. Let's sign the paperwork. But for now, I have to really love it. So I'm being very discerning anyway. And so that way, to get through to me, that letter to me, that approach has to be really, really well written, well polished. If you can't write a good query letter, my feeling is you probably can't write a good book.
Thank you. Okay, so Marcus, I see a lot of LA Times, and I already know LA Times, LA Affair potentials, and I already know, like, for example, they're not set in LA. Or interestingly, they're not about love, or they're, you know, like, so they're just sort of like weird stories of things that happened to you in LA, which doesn't seem like what you do. So what are the biggest mistakes that you see that, you know, where you wind up projecting?
You know, the ones that are always stressful are the ones where you read a column or a submission and you actually like it and you start to move forward with it, and then the writer backs out. And then that happens quite a bit, actually. It happened in the past 2 weeks, and that writer, whose essay is actually publishing tomorrow, had a conversation with her husband, made some tweaks in the piece, and they're not huge tweaks, but enough to get him to sign off on it. So that's kind of a frustrating thing.
Other mistakes, but by the way, do you ask people to show their piece to the spouse or the person they're dating?
No, I don't. Okay. No. Okay. I mean, I think the other thing is, if this piece has gone out to the New York Times and for Modern Love, I don't necessarily want it. If it's just not something that fits like what we're doing. I mean, we're looking for love stories that are interesting, that are bad dates, great dates. I get a lot of pieces that are basically like a summary of someone's relationship, and then it's like, next week we celebrate our 25th anniversary, and that's not really the kind of essay we're looking for. We're looking for usually something that's pretty current. On occasion, I will publish an essay that is about the past, which I did last year, and it's an essay I love because it's about a fashion photographer, or a very well-known photographer who, by the end of the essay, you find out really what happened to him at this point in his life, and it's just a beautiful love story. But oftentimes, I would say, a lot of times people get in their own way in terms of submission. It's sort of like, just jump into the action. It's like a movie. I mean, I don't need all the build up. Just get me in and get going. So that's probably the bigger issues.
There's some chairs over here. Do you guys want to sit? You okay? Okay. So Allison, as a teacher, I know that you help a lot of your students get published with essays and articles. And so what kind of mistakes are you seeing? And when you go over them in class, do you go over them and say, this is summed up, or this is too much showing, not telling? Do you?
Okay, absolutely. So, first of all, nobody comes into the classroom the perfect writer. And I think it's all a learning curve. It's a craft. What we do is a craft. So what separates the students who take one class and those who carry on and really develop their skills is an understanding of how difficult this is, and not just the physical act of sitting down and writing, but really the emotional mining. So I think the biggest mistake I see is that a person comes in and wants to write what happened to them. Like, this crazy thing happened to me, and then this happened and that happened, and then we ended up in jail or something like that, right? But really, the purpose of an essay per se, or a memoir, is really an investigation. So it's really beyond what happened, reaching for why it happened. And for me, I think the thing I like to teach pretty early on, something I learned in essay writing, is it always has to begin with a question. a deep burning question. So something happened to me that, let's just say I come into a classroom and I want to write about something that happened to me. So I tell my students, pay attention to that. Now explore why it might have happened, why you made the decisions that led you to a particular place, and by the end, how the world shifted for you. So I think if there's any mistake per se, it's that people think that writing should be emotionally really easy and that should stay on the surface. When exactly. So when it really needs to go very, very deep in order to be truly vulnerable and truly moving.
Cool. Now, Alan, you're reading a lot of screenplays. I see a lot of screenplays. My husband teaches at NYU Tisch, and everybody thinks they could do a screenplay. In fact, his dentist, while he was getting dental work, was handing him a screenplay. And so, what kind of advice do you give? I mean, certainly taking classes, working with someone who knows what they're doing, or reading screenplays, like you could actually get copies of your favorite screenplays. Robert McKee, like what kind of advice do you give to somebody who aspires to get movies, TV and film made when it's so difficult?
Well, at this point in my life, I don't really do that anymore.
Right. But what kind of advice would you
when
give?
I put my old agent hat on, I would tell him to, hire somebody to do coverage on it, because most agents and most studio people, they don't read the scripts. They send it down for coverage. Somebody writes up a book report and tells them why it's good and why it's not good, and if they should buy it or not buy it, or consider or not consider. And so go through a run through test. When I was an agent, I would be submitted a script, usually from a client of mine or from a producer I knew, whatever, and I'd read it, and I wanted to make sure it made sense. Because the way I would do scripts, I would send them out all like on a Monday or a Tuesday and expect them to have read it, and either they're in or they're out by Friday. Because when it goes over a weekend, the worst thing happens. They all go to the same parties. They all see each other. Oh, did you see that crappy script Gasmer sent me? I hated it. What did you think? Oh, yeah, I hated it too. And all of a sudden I got 2 passes where I never even sent them the script. So I would try and get it all done during the week. And so I worked on a script, and look, remember, I was the illiterate literary agent. I never read any of the classics. I never went to film school. I took 1 film class in my entire career, but I watched a lot of television. And the other thing I did is my father owned a pharmacy, and he used to get all the paperbacks of all the big novels. And if I would hear in the newspaper that they were turning it into a movie, I'd read the book first. Then I'd go to the movie and see what they selected out of the book that became the movie. So, I mean, I was doing this at 12. So so yes, my wife always makes fun of me. So what I would do with, what? Oh, she's a divorce lawyer. So I have to go. Yeah. I'm like, okay, whatever you say, honey, how can you read these scripts? You don't even never read Silas Mariner. I went, nope. What is it? But yeah, no, I read a script, came in from another agent, and I said, it's an interesting setup, but it doesn't make any sense. And he says, well, can you help? You can sell it. And I went, all right. So I worked through with this writer, which is, I don't do anymore, 5 drafts of this stupid script, 5 drafts. And I didn't want to change any creative of anything, because that's not my job. The writer's job that's his creative work. My job was to put it in a presentable format that idiots at the studios could understand. And so I take it out, and of course, nobody wants to buy it until the Monday. During the week, nothing, goose eggs. Monday, I get a call from Disney wanting to buy it. And the greatest line is, they say, how much you want for it? I go, $1 million. And they start laughing, and they go, we know nobody wants to buy this script. Blah, 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 blah. How about $250? I said, I'll tell you what, I'll give it to you for $600. No. So we ended up selling it for like $450,000. Right. They then, as part of the deal, I always made the original writer gets to do a couple of passes, because that's how they get their WGA pension services. So I include that in it. And sometimes, depending on how much leverage I had, I would add a second picture to it, that of an idea that either the writer had or the studio idea had. And there would be a 2-picture package. And so I'm telling you this story. Well, eventually I'll give you the punchline of what the movie is. So we work on it at Disney. They do a rewrite with the writer, 2 drafts and whatever. They bring in a rewriter. He rewrites it. They get Jackie Chan attached to it. So it goes up to the studio for Greenlight Joe Roth that runs the studio, and he says, "It's a good script. I don't want to make a movie with Jackie Chan." We're like, "Oh shit." So it was like, give it back to us. So he put it in turnaround. We then shopped it to every studio, and New Line said, we'll make this movie, but we have a deal. They had an optional picture with this guy, Chris Tucker. And we have this guy, Brett Ratner, who has an optional picture. We'll do it if you can do it for $25 million. Became Rush Hour. So I go see this movie, and of course, the studio executive is so proud of what he did to the script that I'm sitting next to him, I remember, at the Chinese theater. And I'm watching this movie, and it bears no resemblance, none, to what I did, because all I wanted to do was make sense. It made no sense, right? It made no sense. And so I'm watching this. He goes, "Well, what did you think?" I said, "You took out everything I put in for it to make sense. It makes no sense." And he's like, "Oh, come on, Alan, who cares?" $1 billion later, who cares? So yeah, so the coda is punchline. Chris Tucker, he was living in my neighborhood. He's riding one of those Segways around, those things. And I see him, and I go, "Oh, Chris, come here." He comes over, and I said, I sold Rush Hour." He says, "You did?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Do you know why it was called Rush Hour?" And he goes, "No." I said, "Yeah, they took that part out." If you see the movie, all he says is, "It's rush hour." But what he was really meant was the whole movie took place during the busiest rush hour in LA, which is Memorial Day weekend. That was the whole idea, that they had to go from one part of the city to the other part in the middle of rush hour. And to rescue the daughter who was kidnapped by the North Koreans. It was a whole thing. If you've seen the movie, and they made 3 of them, 3 of them. Yeah. So, yeah, that's,
Hilarious. Okay, so I'm going to ask one last question of everyone, and then we're going to open it up. So let's hear what's exciting now. What are you working on now? What's exciting? So Shannon, I know that The One Who Loves You, I know that it was a long road to publishing, because I read your Facebook and your, But so what was the most exciting thing after working on a book like this for years? And I know it's a really important story about growing up and your family. So was it getting the yes, or seeing the hardcover, or doing your events? What's been the most exciting part?
Oh, the most exciting. Let's see. Let's see. Yeah, it's been out a little over a month. I would say so far, I would say one of the most exciting parts was just last Sunday. I had a book club Reddit, and so it was the first time that I was talking with people who weren't my friends and family who had read the book, and that was really fun because they were so excited. And so it was just for strangers to have read my book and talk excitedly about all these little things that I had said and done with the book. That was pretty thrilling. So yeah.
So was it worth the journey?
Oh yeah, it was for sure worth the journey. Yeah. Yeah.
Fantastic. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Okay, Dan, so you have 2 books out yourself, and I know that you mentioned one of your books is up for an LA Times Award, one of Counterpoint's books, and I know we work together on American Shield. So tell us, are you working on a new book yourself, or what's coming out from Counterpoint that's exciting for you?
Yeah, I'm perpetually working on things that never see the light of day. But in my professional life as an editor, I am very excited about a book coming out end of next month called The Lilac People by Milo Todd. It's World War II. It's a historical novel that follows trans people in Germany before, during the Weimar Republic, when things were actually much more progressive for queer people. They survived the Holocaust. At the end of it, the real irony is that the Allies, including the U.S., were re-imprisoning queer people, particularly trans people, under the same draconian laws that the Nazis had established. So it follows our group of chosen families as they ironically have to escape to the U.S. to avoid being re-imprisoned by the Allies. It's a really beautiful, moving novel, and it's very commercial. And I'm pretty sure Milo Todd, the author, would be open to changing the title to Rush Hour if they want to make a movie.
Why not?
Yeah, you can set it during whatever war you want. But no, I'm really excited about that. And I think when we bought the book, we knew it was going to be an important book culturally. But now it's even more so. So it's getting a lot of great early coverage. So I'm really excited for that. That comes out at the end of April. So it's called The Lilac People, and the author is Milo Todd. It's his debut novel. He had been rejected over 700 or about 700 times before we acquired the book. Yep. It's his first published novel, but he had written like 2 or 3 books, and he kept getting rejected by agents, by everybody else, because people could not. They're like, unless it's fantasy, we don't believe the trans people existed, essentially. Which, as we all know, is not the truth. The reason people believe that, though, is because the Nazis did a very good job of purposely erasing that history. All those photos of book burnings that we see are book burnings of the Sexual Institute that Magnus Hirschfeld and others. I mean, I could talk about this all day, but basically it was a very strong push to erase this history like we're seeing now. And so this novel recovers a lot of that history and pays homage to it. So it's really beautiful and moving story. So I'm really excited about that.
Congratulations. So, yeah, we can hand that to Lee. So Lee, I know we're doing our panel Saturday at AWP at 10:30, and one of the panelists is Miriam Shavari, who has a great book that you published called A Little Less Broken, How an Autism Diagnosis Finally Made Me Whole. So are there other books that you want to tell us about that we should go out and buy that Flatiron's putting out?
Yeah, I mean, I think you set me up beautifully for a book that is called Erased, and it's also about erasing history. It is by Anna Malika Tubbs. She wrote a book a few years ago called The Three Mothers that was about the mothers of Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and James Baldwin. And while she was out on tour for that book, people kept asking her, how have I never known the stories of these women? And her short answer was patriarchy. And then her long answer is this book, which is called Erased. It's the story of American patriarchy and how, in order to maintain that system, you have to erase the stories of women, of people of color, of trans people, of disabled people, to pretend that the only people who made this country were the men that we call the founders. So that one's coming out in a couple of months at the end of May. May 25th. I think it's really exciting. Also go get Marion Shambari's book, A Little Less Broken. She's funny, which is great. I love a funny memoir. So that's what I've got.
Yeah, at age 34, she was diagnosed with autism, and it sort of wound up explaining all these things that she'd always questioned herself about. Yeah, so BJ, tell us about what books you have that we should go get.
Okay, so about 10 years ago, I took on an author that was quite an anomaly for me because he writes horror, and horror was a category I never represented. His name is Stephen Graham Jones. And in 2020, his book, The Only Good Indians, came out and made quite a splash and did very well. And then he's extremely prolific. He's who I was speaking about earlier, because since 2020, he published a trilogy, the Indian Lake trilogy, and then a one-off novel called I Was a Teenage Slasher. And then he said he had come up with an idea for a novel, and he wrote it in 12 weeks. Wow. And he said it would have, 10 weeks, it would have taken him a shorter amount of time, but he had to go do something else for 2 weeks. I mean, you just want to kill him. It's just unbelievable. And it's called The Buffalo Hunter. It was just published last week. It's an amazing novel set in 3 time periods. It's historical, about a Lutheran pastor in Montana in 1912 and a Blackfeet man who wants to give his confession to him, who's a vampire, Blackfeet vampire. And it's tied in with a lot of, Stephen is Blackfeet himself, and it's tied in with a lot of really brutal American history. It's a story of revenge. It's a story. It's just amazing. And I found out yesterday it's going to be number 4 on the New York Times bestseller list.
Amazing.
Which is amazing. And then just quickly, another novel that is a completely different, to just show you a bit of a range, called Francine's Spectacular Crash and Burn by a writer named Renee Swindle, which is a sort of funny and very poignant novel about a woman whose mother dies unexpectedly, and she's sort of thrown off course and makes a lot of really terrible decisions, and how she gets herself together through this weird period, through her friendship with this very odd 10-year-old boy named Davy. And it's a lot of fun. It's coming out in next month, April 15th, with Tiny Reparations.
Cool. And you mentioned that you're teaching a class. Is it?
I do something. I don't even remember the name of this organization. It's a workshop. It's a national workshop, and I do these things on Zoom. And they send me query letters, and I read them, and then live with most of the time, the person who wrote it is in the Zoom room.
Can we do that, or is there a way to sign up?
Oh my gosh. I'll have to
get me info. We'll share it. Okay, cool. Now, Marcus, you're a writer and an editor. So is there anything that you're working on yourself right now, aside from publishing other authors in the LA Times?
No. No, but being here on the panel, I'm like, I should write a book. And I either write a screenplay. And
yeah, you got your agent and editor and the producer.
10 weeks. That's great.
Yeah. So tell us more about what's going on with your column, LA Times.
I'm excited. Hopefully we pull this off. We've been wanting to do this for several years. We're wanting to do LA Affairs Live, which we're planning for this summer. We've early stages of it as an event. And we're looking at other ways to adapt LA Affairs, whether it's a podcast. We've talked about TV shows.
You mean so authors would read their pieces?
Yeah. Yep, LA Affairs Live.
Oh, cool.
So I'm excited about that. And who knows? I mean, I do have all these other ideas for my personal self, myself, book ideas, and we'll see. Who knows?
Cool. So, Allison, you said that I know you've been doing some great articles, and you said you're working on a new book, and you're teaching also. So, tell us about your classes, right? In person and online?
Oh, actually, I think all my classes are online right now. I have a new personal essay and memoir class starting at Stanford Extension, but it's very, very full right now. And a UCLA class, which is an intermediate class focused on personal essay and memoir as well, which starts next week. So about my personal work, I was just telling Alan that my memoir, which is set in Hong Kong and India and a little bit in LA Chinatown, is about my discovery in Hong Kong that my Indian journalist's fiance grew up in a turn-of-the-century palace. So it's a 100-room palace, but it turned out to be a 100-room teardown. And so anyway, the book's been out for a while, and about 5 years ago, a university friend of mine, who's quite a famous filmmaker in Hong Kong, read the book, and he decided that he loved it and wanted to work on screenplays and teleplays. So the last thing, we've been working back and forth, and he has a little bit of a team who supports him. And the last draft was the 8th draft. He decided to switch to a teleplay formula, and I could not believe what he had captured. It was a version of this book. It was written as a pilot. And it was equal parts, like so vivid, so funny, so poignant. And it was a little bit haunting too. So it was really exciting to see someone capture what I felt about my book. And so beyond that, my second memoir it's been really fun to write. It's about this period of my life. So regarding my old book with my husband, who was basically
we have to wrap up in a minute, Sibby's
in India, and people only in Los Angeles would people ask me, "Are you still married to that guy?" Right? Okay, so for 10 years, I was able to say, "Of course, I'm married to, Ajay." That's crazy, but unfortunately, I'm no longer married to Ajay, And I'm writing about this period of my life, post Prince, post Palace, starting to date in my 50s for the first time on the apps, and it has just been a complete scream. So that's my next book.
Okay, last. What? I'm sorry, Marcus.
Oh yes.
Oh, okay.
That's in the works.
Okay, we're in a hurry. Zibby said so. I want to hear one.
What?
Tell us one story about Complete Unknown.
I never read the book.
Oh, that's horrible! Don't say that at a bookstore. Tell us a story. Quick.
What nobody really quite knows is that this was developed at HBO 12 years ago. And they wrote us the script, which is the script I eventually read. And the new guy came in, which is what always happens, and kills everything that the previous guy. And this was one of those fatalities. And Bob Dylan's manager gave it to my partner at the time, who said, "Here, you read it." And I looked at the cover. It was called Going Electric. And I went, "Oh, is this the Bob Dylan story?" And he went, "I think so. Yeah." And I read it and I went, "Oh, this is pretty good." It was written by Jay Cox, who's a famous screenwriter with Scorsese, etc. And, the next thing we did was we decided to test the waters, and we sent it to Amazon. We were doing a project, actually based on a book that I never read either. And we gave it to the executive. He read it and said, "We want to buy it." And we're like, "You do?" "Yep. $25 million streaming movie." And we're like, uh-oh, maybe other people want it. So we were busy negotiating with him. I went to a BAFTA tea, which is a British Academy. They put on teas every year. And I saw this kid across the room, and it was Timmy Chalamet. And I said to my partner, "Hey, you think he could be young Bob Dylan?" He goes, "Yeah." I said, "Come on." And we went over, and I saw Tim. I had met him a year earlier on another little movie because my daughter went to NYU with him. So I had met him before. And I went over to the agent, and I said to him, "Hey, does he have any interest being young Bob Dylan?" He goes, "You have a script?" And I said, "Yeah." He sent it to me. 3 days later, he wants to do it. We take the script and start sending it all over to all the other studios. We ended up making a much bigger deal at Fox Searchlight at the time, which was what it was called, and with Tim Chalamet, and then it became Who's the Director? So, and then it was Jim Mangold was the idea, of course, because he did Ford versus Ferrari. He did Walk the Line. This is sort of in that continuum. And we were in pre-production in 2019, 20, something like that. And then COVID hit and shut us down. But that gave Timmy Chalamet 5 years, because it took 5 years, because then we had strikes, to learn how to play the guitar and sing. And Monica Barbaro to learn how to play the guitar and sing. And if you've seen the movie, they do a really spectacular job. So, yeah. So, I mean, that's... Most people don't know the backstory.
That's a great Hollywood story to end on.
Yeah.
All right, you guys. So we're in a hurry. So we have to buy books and get us to sign books to thank Zibby for this fantastic space, and thanks Tessa for having us, and thanks to these amazing panelists. So okay. Great. Wait, stay here for 1 sec. Would you get a picture?